Welcome to Heresy, the miniature wargaming talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Legions of Legions Imperialis, which is released today from Games Workshop, a new game focused on the Horus Heresy in epic scale. We're going to be talking about choosing yourself a legion, also each individual legion's rules and what that means they're good at and so on, and also as well putting all those different legions into a tier list because everybody loves a good tier list. So on with the show. First of all, let's talk a bit about choosing a legion. So there's lots of different reasons why you might want to choose a legion, and we'll talk about a few of them now. I also did a video a long time ago, over a year ago now, focused on Horus Heresy that talked about how to choose a legion as well, so it's worth going back and giving that one a watch if you're really stuck about what you want to do. So the first thing is the lore. Depending on how into the Horus Heresy lore you are or aren't, you might have a favourite chapter. I do now. I didn't last time I did this, but I love Iron Hands. I've really got into Iron Hands, so I decided before the game turned up that I was going to play them. They're not quite as good in this game as they were in Heresy, but, I enjoy painting them, so I'm going to stick with them, and I love their lore. So, you can choose based on that, or if that's not your bag, you can choose based on other stuff as well. Painting and modelling is also a big thing. Now, painting Legions Imperialis and anything in small scale, in my opinion, is really fun. So this is quite a big deal. They're quite quick to paint. They're easy to make them look good. They are very fun to paint, and there's lots of cool modelling opportunities at small scales as well. So if that appeals to you and you've got a particular scheme you want to paint in mind, or a way you want to base the models or something, that's also a way to make your choice. In the future as well, we would expect there to be some Legion-specific models, and you can see examples of those in the 28mm Horus Heresy. And if there are cool models that you like, you might base your Legion off this as well. You might want to paint a certain Primarch, an epic scale. I'm sure we'll get them eventually. You might just enjoy painting bikes and land speeders, so you decide you want to play White Scars. Whatever it is, that's also a factor too, as well as playstyle. So I just mentioned White Scars. You might be the kind of person who likes going fast. That might dictate the kind of models you want, the playstyle, and therefore the legion you end up choosing. Similarly, you get people who love World Eaters because they love charging into combat, love Imperial Fists because they love sitting still and shooting things. Sometimes that plays into it as well. So it's up to you how you choose your legion. But what I'm going to mostly talk about today, and what you're probably here for if you're listening to a Heresy video, is talking about the rules. Now, the rules can be a big factor in deciding what you want to play. They are for a lot of people. Sometimes you might like a legion, but you don't want to play them if they're weak on the table. And for some people, rules are maybe the deciding factor because you're happy to paint anything, or you don't care what you paint or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you've ever seen my videos before, I'm cool with however you want to do these kind of things, from the scale of completely casual to competitive. What I'm going to tell you about is the rules for the legions and how good they are or aren't. So let's do that. Now, if you've played Warhammer 40,000 or Horus Heresy, you'll know that most Space Marine chapters or legions have quite a lot of rules. They're a lot simpler in Legions Imperialis, so they do a lot less stuff, but they are still impactful in most cases. Won't take us as long to go through them as it would normally, though, so we're going to go through all the legions. Firstly, the first legion, the Dark Angels. So they've got the Hexagrammaton, formations of the Hexagrammaton rule. So what they do is, at the start of the battle, which means this is quite flexible from the get-go, for every formation you've got that's got 3 or more different types of detachment, so core, support, HQ even counts for this, all those different things. So very easy to trigger this as long as you're not using one type of thing in a detachment. You choose one of these abilities for the formation to get. So you can choose for all infantry in the formation to gain Phosphex and Implacable, all cavalry to gain Outflank, or all vehicles to gain Nimble. So this is pretty flexible because you're going to choose it at the start of the battle, but it's only going to affect some of the units in the formation. Now, the Phosphex and Implacable one's really good. Phosphex means that when you assault a unit in a building, they don't get a close assault factor bonus for being in a building. Now, if you assault someone in a building with troops that are similar, you're just going to lose most of the time. Overwhelmingly, the odds are not in your favour there. So Phosphex is really good. If you got assault troops with this on top, they're going to be really good at assaulting things out of buildings, which is one of the key things you need to do in the game to win. So I really like this ability. On top of that, they also get Implacable, which means they don't fall back if they lose a combat. So even if you're not using the Phosphex part of it, just defending a building or an objective or wherever, the infantry in this formation won't run away, which is also really big because it means people have basically got to wipe you out to the last man, which isn't that easy to do, really. Now, if you want to use cavalry, you get outflank, which is good. Outflank and everything that uses reserves in this game is a lot better than in Heresy. If you played Heresy, you just basically move on from the edge of the board. So outflank's a really good ability. We don't know how good the units with this are yet, though, because they're not in the game. So I'm going to assume this is good. I'm assuming those units will be good, but we don't quite know yet. Also, you can get nimble on your vehicles. Now, this is going to vary. Whether this is good or not is going to vary by board and the placement of the terrain. So nimble lets you move through difficult terrain with no movement penalty. That can be really big. If you've got to get to a certain objective or if the objective is in the terrain, being able to get your vehicles on there, especially if they're rhinos carrying troops potentially, could be a game-changing ability. And again, what's good about this Legion ability is it's very flexible. So if you think you need that with your army and what's on the table in front of you, you can choose it at the start of the game. If not, you can give all your infantry Phosphex and Implacable instead, which is pretty good. So overall, a pretty good Legion trait, I think, does some important things for the things in the game that are important to winning, which is largely killing infantry on objectives or getting to objectives. And I think this is pretty good for Dark Angels players. Next, we got Emperor's Children. So Emperor's Children is pretty simple what it does. So once a game, you just auto-win the initiative. That's it. Once a game, you don't roll, you just win. Unfortunately, you don't get to see the roll first. If the Emperor's Children detachment is allied into the army, so when you choose an army, you pick what faction the army is going to be, but you can also ally in other factions as well. If they're allied, you only get to re-roll once a battle, not auto-win once a battle. So, that changes a little bit. So stops you cheesing a single small detachment of Emperor's Children into your army to auto-win initiative once. Now, this can be really good. Initiative sometimes is very powerful, and on some turns is less relevant. But when it is relevant, it's super relevant. And the main reason for that is because assaults are really important in this game. When you've got initiative, not only do you choose the order in which all of the different combats are resolved, but also the order of the fight within those combats as well. So having initiative on a critical assault turn can be quite a big deal. Likewise, when you've got units on first fire, you get the first, all of the shooting phases, actually, the first fire and the advance and fire phase, the person with initiative gets to choose who shoots first. So, if you've got, for example, 2 Titans squaring off, they're both on first fire, you can choose to win the initiative. Your Titan can fire at the other Titan first, which could mean it kills it before you take damage or something like that. Similarly with detachments of vehicles and things too. So initiative can be quite a big deal. So I think this is a pretty good trait. It's only once a game, but I think when you use it at critical moments, it'll be pretty powerful potentially. Also as well, you get to paint purple, which nearly had me on these, but I stuck to Iron Hands in the end. Then we've got the Iron Warriors. So the Iron Warriors one is an ability that people seem quite excited about. I'm a bit less excited about it. So it gives your infantry +1 tactical strength when you are considering their strength for a neutral objective. Now, using English, neutral means an objective nobody controls. So we're going to assume it's that for now. What it could also mean, and has meant in the past in some Games Workshop games, is an objective that's in the middle of the table rather than one of the ones in your deployment zones. And the second part of this ability gives you +2 tactical strength when you're on your own deployment zone. So it's difficult to tell for 100% certain what that first ability is meant to do exactly. But in any case, +1 tactical strength is good, but when you consider that an infantry stand has 5 tactical strength already, +1's actually only a small increase. So yes, if you've got the same number of stands on the objective, the Iron Warriors would possibly win. And in the first turn, maybe that will be a super relevant thing when everybody's, charging, trying to take over those center objectives. A lot of the time, it won't matter that much, I don't think. Plus, if you want to take an objective off someone, you have to have double their strength on the objective as well. So the +1 does matter. But a lot of the time, if you weren't going to beat them in double anyway, bumping it up a little bit more isn't going to make a difference, even though that would be +2 at that point. How you're likely going to take these objectives a lot of the time is just wiping the other person out. Or wiping out enough stands, in an overwhelming fashion that you've got 5 stands left and they've got 1 or 2. in which case this +1 also doesn't do anything. I'm not going to go through all the maths, but I did a little bit of maths on this, and it actually isn't that impactful most of the time. The +2 strength in the deployment zone obviously is. That's a much bigger number, and it does mean that, you know, people genuinely are going to have to wipe your units out or massively overwhelm them to take things. But I don't think this is super amazing. It's definitely nice to have. It's definitely pretty good. Doesn't help you win the fights, though. And quite a few of these legions have things to help win the fights, which I would probably prefer. But either way, if you're an Iron Warriors player, if you love Iron Warriors, a lot of players do, it's a good ability, middle of the pack, and certainly will have an impact on your games. I look forward to finding out a little bit of clarification from a rules point of view what neutral is supposed to mean. Okay, next we've got White Scars. So White Scars get +1 to their Jinx saves. Very simple. Right now, that's not great because, again, land speeders and bikes, which we assume will have this rule, don't exist in the game. It does work on planes, on all the aircraft, but that isn't even very good right now because the planes have naturally got a 5+ Jink, the save and throws are 3 or 2+, and very few weapons in the game have got better than a -2 save and throw modifier. So most of the time, and you're going to be hit with things that have got a -1 save and throw modifier. So a lot of the time, even on a plane, this won't actually do anything that you weren't getting already. So difficult to rate this one right now. I'm sure it's going to be great when we have the models this is really intended to work on. You could certainly do some stuff with planes with it right now, but it wouldn't be super impactful. Then we're on to the Space Wolves. So the Space Wolves have been given their classic acute sensors style rule. That means enemies can't infiltrate within 16 inches of you and can't outflank within 8 inches of you. Now, in some missions, that will push infiltrating armies or units away from the center objectives, because the center objectives are normally about 14, but you can hold objectives within 3 inches, so it won't even stop them jumping on them. It will stop people putting stuff right in front of your deployment zone, which is cool. Stops people outflanking within 8 inches of you. They can come on anywhere along the board edge, so it's not, 8 inches isn't a big bubble for that. And that's all Space Wolves get. Most people can't infiltrate at all. Most people can't outflank at all, and if they do, they'll be further than 8 inches away. This is maybe the worst Legion rule. They probably could have done with a second half to this, like, +1 close assault factor when they charge, or just something to give this a little bit more oomph instead of leaving this on their own. Or this should have been the throw-in extra secondary rule to some better primary rule. This is just really bad. I feel really bad for Space Wolves players. It's poor design looking at this and realising that in most games it won't do anything, and in the games when it does work, it doesn't do much. Bit of a miss there. Not great writing. Poor Space Wolves players. And then in contrast to Space Wolves, we've got Imperial Fists. So Imperial Fist rules, pretty simple. When they're on first fire, all of their bolt weapons, so combi bolters, bolt pistols, as well as heavy weapons on their infantry, so las cannons, plasma cannons, missile launchers, get to reroll hits. They get the accurate trait, so they get to reroll their misses, which is quite a big deal in this game, because most weapons hit on a 4, and most weapons don't get any way to buff that at all. So all your infantry, which are already, spoiler alert, the most important units in the game, are now getting extra equivalent shots, effectively 50% more damage out of all your infantry. This is huge. Now, although you have got to be on first fire to do it, a lot of the time, the way you will use infantry is you will plonk them somewhere or on something, and then put them on first fire and sit them there, and that's what you're going to do. This is also huge for Overwatch, so when you Overwatch people, you're going to hit on 6s, which means that Imperial Fists Overwatching are going to get double the hits, which is kind of a bit Imperial Fisty in a lot of ways, blazing away with their bolters. It's just such an amazing rule. So yet again, Imperial Fists in Heresy, one of the best rules, and just really, really good. Especially when we see some of these heavy weapons come out. We don't have them all yet, but once these are on the table, Imperial Fists are going to be a real force with that rule. Next, we got the Night Lords, so the wordiest special rule of all of the legions. What it boils down to is if you kill an enemy commander, so a HQ unit from either of the two armies that are currently released, a nearby enemy detachment, so within 4 inches, takes 3 hits. So you will generally not be killing an enemy commander until something like the end of a formation's lifespan. Sometimes in melee, you might be doing that. If you get into an assault, you might kill that early or something like that. But when you do, you get 3 hits on the enemy, and they get to save it, and they get to use their morale as the save value as well, which for for Marines is generally going to be 3, or still might be 2 if there's another commander nearby. So this mostly, maybe does 1 extra hit on the unit if you kill a commander, if there's still anything left in the unit when you do it, which is only really going to happen in assault. Maybe if there's another enemy formation nearby, another enemy detachment nearby, when you kill the detachment, you might hit them, but it's only 4 inches. This is cool and flavorful. Maybe if snipers exist in the game at some point, it might be a bit better. But right now, it's borderline unusable. It does almost nothing in most situations. So yeah, poor Night Lords. Like Space Wolves, this probably could have done with a little bit of something extra to go with it. Or maybe, in this game, something like, morale deductions or something like that would have actually been impactful in this game, as opposed to other games where it doesn't do a lot. It would have made a big difference in this game. It's a shame they didn't get something like that in a game where it's actually good. Then we got Blood Angels. So Blood Angels' ability is cool. They get to consolidate, basically. They get to move 3 inches in any directions after they win a fight. So after they wipe the enemy out or make them run away. That's really good. So they can, maybe duck behind some cover, or they can go into another enemy unit. Now, they don't necessarily get to fight twice, although that can protect them from being shot a little bit if they do that. Or they can move into a garrisonable structure or into cover, something like that. So it's a really good rule, this. Now, they can fight twice in a specific circumstance. So if it consolidates into an enemy unit that is already in a combat, worded a little bit funny, you could argue it doesn't already need to be in a combat because it's in a combat at the point you've moved into it. But I don't think that's the intention. So if you've got, a couple of Blood Angel detachments fighting enemy detachments nearby, if you wipe out one enemy detachment, this can go into another combat already in progress and fight again. Now, that's quite powerful. If you imagine maybe you've got an enemy infantry detachment with some tanks next to it, you could charge them too with 2 different Blood Angels detachments. One of them could just handily wipe out the tanks and then pile into the infantry as well, is a way you might use this. So, pretty cool ability. Hard to get the double fight off, but the 3-inch consolidate itself can be pretty good. Iron Hands, my favourite legion. So, Iron Hands get to use Feel No Pain, the ability, against light anti-tank weapons as well as just light weapons. Now, light anti-tank weapons are realistically one of the most common sources in the game of good anti-infantry firepower. So, most infantry guns, bolters, are light, and everyone gets to feel no pain against that. But most of the guns that have got a save and throw modifier, most light guns have got a 0 AP. So most guns that have got some AP or a significant number of shots, etc., enough to really be hurting infantry are light anti-tank, which you don't get feel no pain against. Iron Hands do. I think this is a cool rule. The only problem in the game right now is that the only way to get feel no pain is to be near a HQ unit that's got a Medicae. So, playing Iron Hands, for me, I've obviously been working on lists for this already, means squeezing as many HQ units in as I can to make the most out of this rule. But I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's the best because you can still shoot them with other weapons, or it does nothing if you were getting shot by lights anyway. But I really like it. I think light AT will be a very common way of trying to remove infantry, and I think this will really help. And in addition, they get an extra bit as well. Their vehicles that have got a first fire order get +1 to their save and throw. Now, it is only until they shoot, because once you shoot, you lose the order. So if you've got a bunch of stuff on first fire and the enemy's all on advance, your save and throw will be gone by the time they get to shoot you. So the enemy can play around it. But, given that this is the second half of a 2-part rule, I think this is pretty nice. It's not as good as Emperor's Children choosing the initiative, but if you are in a first fire war with someone and they've got initiative, at least your units will be +1 save. You can auto-save on a 1+ in this game as well. So if you do this on a Kratos, which has got a 2+ save, it's invulnerable to light anti-tank weapons completely because they only have a zero save modifier as well. So I think this is a pretty decent part of the rule. You have to work to make it work, and your enemy can play around it. But, given we've got 2 separate rules in there, I think Iron Hands have done quite well, which makes me happy. World Eaters have done really well out of this rule. So their infantry and their cavalry and their walkers, so all their dreadnoughts, which are already really good in combat, get to re-roll one of their fight dice in a combat. Now, this is just brilliant. Because it's Heresy, and because everything's abstracted and most units are very similar, most combats are decided by you both roll 2 dice and the highest roll wins. Maybe someone's got 1 more close assault factor than the other person. If you got Dreadnoughts, you're going to be like 2 or 3 more. So Dreadnoughts are a good way to win the fights. Even Assault Marines have only got 1 higher natural fight value. So mostly you're rolling off 2d6 with someone having a slight advantage. Being able to reroll means if the enemy's charging you, you're probably still odds on for the draw. And if you're charging, you've got a very good chance of winning. Now, assaults in this game are one of the main ways you will win games. Getting infantry out of cover is pretty difficult with guns, pretty time consuming. There's no super effective weapons for killing infantry outside of Titans, which will be big targets. So assaults are a big deal. And World Eaters have got one of the few abilities that really affects assaults. So I think this makes them really good. I think this is one of the best rules that any of the Legions have got, and World Eaters players should be really happy. Then we got the Ultramarines, the blue boys, reroll 1s to hit with shooting when they're shooting at an enemy detachment that's already been hit by a model in the same formation. So, similar to the rules in Heresy in a way, you've got to be shooting 2 detachments within 1 formation at 1 enemy unit. So, not too hard to trigger, but it does mean that the first detachment that fires won't get any bonuses. And when you are getting bonuses, you're only rerolling 1s. As I said before, most weapons in Heresy need a 4 or a 5 to hit, which is 5 or 6 if people are in cover. So rerolling 1s is not that impactful. Rerolling 1s obviously does more when your base to hit number is more like a 3+, as it often will be in a game of 40k or Heresy. So this is generally a low impact rule. Not everything gets it. It's only 1s that you're rerolling. There's a condition to do it. It's just not brilliant. It's okay. It's certainly better than what some people have got, but it could have been a lot better. Death Guard have got another version of one of their classic rules. So start of the game, they pick 2 pieces of difficult terrain, so like area terrain to become dangerous. Now that's really good because when you move through dangerous terrain, you take an automatic hit that you can save against for every inch you go through the terrain. So you really don't want to be moving through dangerous terrain, like at all, if you can help it, because you can lose a lot of models. So this can really be a great area denial thing that you can do. You can also do it to buildings instead. So for every piece of difficult terrain you don't do, you get to do 2 buildings. When someone garrisons the building, they count as having to move through 1 inch of dangerous terrain. So not super impactful. It also works when they ungarrison it as well, so it can give you a couple of free hits, but not that impactful really. This can be a great rule or not, depending on your board. If there's a big building that lots of things are going to be garrison and ungarrison on an objective all game, might be really good for you to use that as for a bunch of free hits throughout the game. If there's big pieces of difficult terrain, important positions, it could be really good. But equally on some battlefields, it might just be pointless. Against some opponents who might not need to use that terrain or might not care, it also might be pointless as well. So really up and down this one. Flavorful classic Death Guard rule, but going to have a very varied impact. Thousand Suns HQs gain the Shield Generator rule. So Shield Generator is a 6-inch AoE bubble of 6+ invulnerable save for all units that are in the bubble against things that are outside the bubble. This does also affect enemies as well, although you don't get a save in melee anyway. It's only against shooting, so that's probably not too much of a big deal. Doesn't seem really that great, this. A lot of the time when you're shooting at infantry, which are going to be the things that are nearby to this bubble, they'll mostly have a save and throw of 5 or 6 anyway. And even if they didn't, just giving them a 6+ doesn't help that much against most shooting. For vehicles, most vehicles have got a save of 3 or 2. Very few things have got an AP greater than 2. So most of the time, this won't do anything for vehicles either. So it's just very low impact because the invulnerable level is just too low, combined with only having it on HQs in a small bubble. It's just not very good. I think this probably looks a bit better than the Space Wolf one, but in actual fact, it might actually be worse or just as bad in some ways. So poor Thousand Suns, this is not great. Sons of Horus have got a fairly flavorful rule, so kind of similar to Ultramarines. They get to reroll 1s when they've got an advance order, they're within 6 of the enemy, they're using a light or light anti-tank weapon. So it's quite conditional, quite short range, and it's only rerolling 1s, which is low impact for the same reasons. One good thing about this, though, it is when you've got an advance order, so you can also get the benefits in Overwatch, which can be nice, but again, you're rerolling 1s into a 6, so maybe not so much. Low impact like the Ultramarines one, I think this ultimately, you will use it quite a lot throughout the battle, but when you do use it, it's just not going to make a huge difference to what you're doing. The word bearers, as ever, are a bit fanatical, so they never count as broken for the purposes of issuing orders. Now, this is a little bit confusing, this one, because in the rules, when you're broken, you can be issued with an advance or charge order, but not first fire or march. Now, the first time I read that, I was like, you can still charge when you're broken? That seems a bit weird. And the rules for word bearers actually says, instead of only being able to advance or march, you can do the other stuff. So the word bearers rule contradicts the actual rules as to what you're allowed to do and not do. So one of those two things is wrong, and we don't know what that is. If the word bearers rule allows you to charge when you wouldn't normally be able to charge, this could be reasonably decent. If all it allows you to do is march when you're otherwise broken, and the rules are actually correct and the word bearers text is just wrong, this is less good. In either of those cases, though, this is not a great rule. You know, when you're broken, you can issue other orders. I mean, being able to advance when you're broken, which is not in contention, is fine anyway. It's not that big a deal. You're still active, so this rule doesn't help a lot. They are also immune to the Dread rule, which is -1 morale. When Dread's in effect, it can be quite impactful, because morale's only a d6, and you're normally needing to roll a 2 or a 3, so it does change the odds quite a lot. But there's only one unit in the game, I think, the Psi Titan, that's got Dread right now, so it's super uncommon. So maybe at some point this will be more impactful, but probably not. Fear's not a big deal in Heresy generally. So word bearers rule, not fantastic. And then last but not least, we got the Salamanders with one of my favourite rules of all the legions. So whenever you take a morale check, you roll 2 dice instead of 1 dice, which is borderline auto-pass in most situations. So Marines have normally got a 3+ morale, or a 2+ morale if there's a commander nearby. This lets you reroll the dice. So at worst, you've got a 1 in 9 chance of failure. If you've got a commander, 1 in 36 chance. You're basically immune to failing morale rolls with Salamanders unless you're very unlucky, which is really, really, really good in this game, because it's hard to get rid of lots of infantry in this game. What you will often do is try to break them, make them run away, beat them in an assault, make them run away, which they're also immune to. So all detachments, and this is not just infantry, by the way, this is all Salamanders, including vehicles, all detachments gain Implacable. So if they lose an assault, they can choose if they fall back or not. So Salamanders, you've really got to wipe them off the table to do anything with them. And I think the fact that, you know, they are immune to that is very, very good. And I think they've done really well out of this rule. Raven Guard detachments made up completely of infantry gain the Infiltrate special rule. I nearly tripped over saying that then. They gain the Infiltrate special rule. If your units are made up of only infantry and transport, your detachments I should say, or cavalry and walkers, they gain the Forward Deployment rule instead, which means they get a pre-game move. Now this is really, really good. So the way the missions work in this game is they are primarily, you know, what you call progressive scoring. So you take and hold the objectives. There's normally quite a lot of objectives on the table as well. And predominantly you gain points at the end of every turn, one way or another, for the objectives. Now, I've said before, it's quite hard to shift infantry in this game. It takes an outsized amount of firepower compared to the points cost of infantry. The only problem that infantry have is getting somewhere. Well, it's not that hard to get places, but getting somewhere. Now, all your infantry in your army gain an Infiltrate means not only can they start on the midfield objectives, it means they can also start in front or around the midfield objectives. Now, you have to be within 3 to take an objective as well. So if you plonk down a detachment on an objective, or inside, you know, a building next to an objective, maybe even better, you're going to be in control of that easily. If you spread them out, the other person, when they move on their first turn, even if they've got rhinos, might not be able to get within 3 inches of that objective, even if they assault you. And that still assumes that they win the assault as well. You can basically flood the board with infantry with a Raven Guard. If you're of a mind to do so, you can take an army of all infantry, cover absolutely all of the objectives on the board in the home and neutral territory with infantry, and then just say to your opponent, cool, come and get me before you lose the game on points. Not only that, but they can also do it with transports and forward deployment as well. Cavalry walkers. So if you want to put dreadnoughts, which are tougher in combat, more guns, you want to bring up some rhinos or, soon probably land raiders and Spartans with your infantry as well, they can also basically be on the objectives on turn 1. Now, other people can do that as well, be on the objectives turn 1, but you're there first, which means you can dictate how things work. It means you can get in the buildings, which is a huge advantage. I think Raven Guard have probably got one of the 2 best abilities in the game, and I think if you're going to go to a tournament and you really want to win, I think this is a pretty good shout for something that I think will struggle to lose if you build it in the right way. Maybe something that might need looking at, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes on. Certainly, they could plonk stuff on the midfield objectives, and the other person, if they're World Eaters, could just assault you off them all. So it's not like there's no counterplay, but it's very, very strong. And speaking of very strong, then we've got Alpha Legion, which basically does the same thing as Raven Guard in real terms. So for each formation, you pick 3 detachments, and they gain the mutable tactics rule. So mutable tactics means if you're infantry, cavalry, walker, or vehicles, you can give them infiltrate, outflank, or forward deployment. Or if they're another type of unit, you can just give them forward deployment. So that would be like a bastion unit, like Deredio Dreadnoughts. Now, this is basically just as good as the Raven Guard one. 3 detachments in a formation, gaining one of these is fine, because some of your detachments in the formation are going to stay in your DZ anyway when you start. So this is borderline the same thing as just giving everything infiltrate. Although in this case, you can also choose to give them outflank, and it also applies. You can infiltrate dreadnoughts with this. You can infiltrate vehicles with it. This is like bonkers level. So everything I've just said about Raven Guard applies to this as well, and it's just better again. Maybe you get slightly less units with it, but you can very easy to work around, and you get more options, and you can do it with more things. So this is really good, I think. Okay, so onto the tier list. Well, let's go through these. So you've heard all the rules, you've heard what they all do, you've heard a bit about what I think about them. Let's see where do they fit. Right, so we're just going to go left to right. We'll start with Alpha Legion. You've heard what I've just said about these. I think these are the best. If what we're trying to do is build the most powerful army possible, I think these are the best in the game. And I think it's, pretty much hands down them, and also as well Raven Guard. I would say Alpha Legion just nudge it a little bit because they can fully infiltrate slightly more units, but they're both basically the same. If you're not playing these to the hilt, where you're going to drop stuff on every objective on the board, then these would be a bit less powerful. They'd still be very good because you'll still have a lot of advantages in there. You just won't be taking advantage of them quite as much. But if we're talking strict power levels, these are the best, and I think it's fairly not close as well, just because of what these guys can do. So there you go. There's your S tier units. Now Blood Angels, they've got that ability to consolidate, which is kind of nice. They occasionally get a fight twice, which even just doing that a couple of times a game could be really good. But sometimes 3-inch won't get you where you want to go, and also as well, sometimes you just won't get a chance to do that fight twice as well. So I think they're fairly middle of the road. I think that's a good, solid ability. It's not too good. It's also not bad. And then we've got Dark Angels. So I really like the Dark Angels abilities. Not all of the units in the formation are going to benefit from it, but mostly it's going to be focused on your infantry, that Phosphex and Implacable. As I've said a few times, I think not running away in a melee is huge in this game. And also having the ability to assault things out of buildings with Phosphex, without worrying about the fact that they've got an untouchable, +3 close assault factor bonus is brilliant. Having the option to nimble your vehicles around, or to outflank your other stuff as well, is also pretty cool. I think that Dark Angels are really good. I don't think they're too good or too bad either. So next we've got Death Guard. So Death Guard, I think, have a similar, sort of in a similar vein to Dark Angel. I think they've got ability that is okay. Sometimes it's going to be really good. Sometimes it's not going to be very good at all. But, for the most part, it's going to be fine. It's going to do something. It's not going to do loads. Actually, I think thinking about it, Now I'm thinking about it a little bit more. It's probably slightly below average, I'd say, verging on the well-balanced. I think a lot of the time on the board you're going to play on, your opponent's going to find this fairly easy to work around. So whilst these will jump up some tiers sometimes with certain ways the boards are laid out, I think a lot of the time you're going to struggle to get tons of value out of this. Emperor's Children, I think, is a straight up good ability. I think you're going to get not many benefits for a lot of the game, which is certainly a downside. But when you do get the benefits, it's got the potential to be a very swingy big benefit. And I think it's cool. You can also use it as an ally just to get a small benefit. I might do this just because I really want to paint some purple stuff as well. And I think that's pretty well balanced. I think that when we go on to Imperial Fists, I think they are above average. And I think they're also going to probably be the top of the above average category as well. Although we haven't got all of the guns yet. In terms of the impact of abilities, when you look at like what Ultramarines or Sons of Horus do, they just get to reroll some ones in some fairly tight circumstances. These guys have got full rerolls, very easily obtainable. And although right now that's mostly on bolters, even that alone, when you think about doing that in close combat against other infantry, just machine gunning them with a lot of shots, I think it's really good. Iron Hands, I think, are maybe the top of the well balanced. Maybe they go into above average just because the Feel No Pain rule is pretty good. You do have to build around it to get it, which knocks it down a peg. But then they've got a second rule with the vehicles as well, which is also pretty good. Some of the legions like Space Wolves would have killed for a second half to the rule. So Iron Hands maybe above average, maybe the lower end of above average, but certainly up there. Iron Warriors, I think, are pretty well balanced. I think their ability is decent. I think, some of the conversations I've had about it, this is the one that people are picking out as the best, which I definitely don't agree with at all. But it is still good. It's impactful in most or all games in some way. Just doesn't necessarily help you win the game on its own, or win the fights at least. Night Lords, I think, definitely goes down into the weak category. You can make this work in an assault if your opponent lets you do that in certain circumstances. If you manage to beat the command stand, which is better if there is enough stuff left over for the hits to make a difference, and if you fail the saves. But realistically, most games, this is going to, at best, going to equate to a couple of extra hits over the entire course of the game. So it's pretty poor. Salamanders, I think, is above average. I think the ability for your whole army to be borderline immune to morale from shooting and never retreat in combat, not just the infantry, everything, is very, very powerful. I could see being, proved wrong a little bit on that in favour of some of the more combat-y abilities, like Dark Angels maybe. But for me right now, I think this is really good. Sons of Horus is below average. I think there's too many conditions that need to happen for them to get the reroll, and when they do get the reroll, it's only rerolls of 1, which isn't enough. Space Wolves, I think we all know where I sit on that from what I've seen already, and I think Thousand Suns the same as well. Maybe it probably is slightly better than Space Wolves, because maybe across the course of the game, it might save you a tank on one save and throw, or a couple of tanks, or maybe even a standard infantry against a gun that has -2 AP or something like that. So it may do something across the course of the game, more than Space Wolves, but I think majority of the time, not much. Ultramarines below average as well. Same reason as Sons of Horus, really, just not an impactful enough ability. Word Bearers, I think, are in the a little weak pile as well. I think their rule doesn't do a lot, because being able to advance is always fine. Being able to do other stuff is nice, but it's not a big deal if all you can do is advance and there's barely any dread in the game. So even though they got a 2-part rule, they're still pretty weak, I think. World Eaters go squarely up here, probably up maybe ahead of the Imperial Fists, potentially even. Assaults are the biggest thing in the game, I think, again. Or some of the most impactful things in the game, even though the shooting's obviously very powerful as well. But the difference in just rolling your 2 dice the same as basically everyone and have an ability that makes you better in combat, I think is quite a big deal. So whether they are the actual top of that category or not, they're definitely in that category. And then White Scars, last of all. I think right now this is below average, but this will almost certainly move. And if Bikes and Land Speeders are any good, if they've got a 5+ Jinx save, even if they've got a 6+ Jinx save, I think this probably jumps up to above average or, the high end of well-balanced. But for now, this just doesn't really do an awful lot, although I certainly wouldn't let that stop you painting White Scars if you like them, because this is almost certainly going to be great. Just looking at the ordering of these things, I think this is the way I would order Very Powerful. This is the way I would order above average. Probably I think Iron Hands are just the low end of that, but certainly should be in the category. I think well-balanced, I like the Dark Angels one the most, just because it's very flexible and it affects assaults. These other three probably similar-ish. I think the below average one are all about the same, and Little Weak one, yeah, I think this is probably in rough order as well. So there you go. That's the tier list. That's where I think we are with this, and that's where I think all of these factions land. And that's the end of the show. Thank you all very much for tuning in. It's been really nice to be back recording again. It's been over a year since I last recorded something, so I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed doing it. I'm really looking forward to Legions Imperialis. I've played a couple of small games so far. I'm looking forward to playing a lot more in the next few weeks as well. So do come back and tune in for some more Legions Imperialis content. And until then, I'll see you soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.